Good evening and welcome to Conversations. I'd like to thank Paris Photo for inviting myself and the artists to be part of this debut edition at Paris Photo, the voice sector. And the idea with this exhibition that I've curated and I've invited these three incredible artists is to work with the concept of the archive. I have these three artists with us here. Very grateful to Paris for making it possible to have the artists present at the fair. And we have Lebohang Kganye, who's to my right. Next to her is Joana Choumali and Dongdong. I'm going to quickly read a brief summary of the bios so that we get a sense of who they are and what they've been doing over the last few years. Lebohang Kganye works with expanded photography, video, and mixed media to create deeply researched works that layer historiography, theatricality, autobiography, and poetics in often sculptural installations. The artist's name is etymologically linked to the Sotho word for light, Kganye, and bringing light and life to layered post-colonial histories is an animated thread within her practice. Kganye is a recipient of the Deutsche Boys Prize for Photography 2024 for her exhibition Haufi in Joana, I've Come to Take You Home, which took place at Forum Amsterdam in 2023. Other notable recent awards include Forum Paul Hoff Award in 2022, Grand Prix Image for Vevey in 2021, and Camera Austria Award in 2019. The artist has recently exhibited at Tate, the Bounce Foundation, the Art Institute of Chicago, Yale University Art Gallery, and others. In 2022, Kganye was one of the three artists exhibited in Into the Light, the South African Pavilion, at the 59th Venice Biennale. Kganye's work is held in public collections, including the Smithsonian Institution, the Art Institute of Chicago, Getty Museum, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Musée d'Art Modern, Victoria and Albert Museum, Vermont Collection, Walter Collection, and the Carnegie Art Museum, amongst others. A round of applause, please, for a good round. Joana Choumali is an Ivorian artist, photographer based in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. Her work often explores themes of identity, memory, and mental health. Using photography as a medium for personal and collective storytelling, she is known for her mixed media approach, incorporating embroidery and collage into her photographic forms, which leads to a tactile quality to her exploration of psychological and emotional landscapes. One of her notable series, Savale, It Will Be Okay, was created in the aftermath of a terrorist attack in Grand Bassam, Côte d'Ivoire. In this series, Choumali embroidered onto photographs she took with her smartphone, creating a meditative process that allowed her to process trauma and reflect on resilience. Her work has been exhibited internationally. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2019 Prix Pictet Photography Award, which highlights photography that addresses social and environmental issues. Choumali's work invites viewers to engage with layered complexities of African identity, personal memory, healing, making her an influential figure in the contemporary art scene. A round of applause, please, for Joana. And as you all see, Dongdong is the male figure next to Joana. During the exhibition, a lot of people came up to me to say, well, you have three artists in your exhibition, three female artists in your exhibition. Well, this is a little bit of a surprise for you. Dongdong is from Beijing, was born in Gansu province, China. He studied at the Beijing Film Academy in 2022, using photography, installation, and video as the main creative media. Kai's work aimed at complex cultural issues using photography and cartographic history from perspective of visual culture, discussing the issues including the presentation of representation and the power of viewing. Currently, he lives and works in Beijing, China, and Berlin, Germany. In 2018, Paris Photo, he's exhibited in New York Times. He's been part of the 8 brilliant artists created work of photography in the future. He was awarded the first prize at the third Tenor Contemporary Art Award in Italy and top 20 young photographers in 2015. His work and his book, History of Life, was published in 2021. And his recent book, Game of Photos, was it Game of Photos? Game of Photos as well was received a number of notable photographic awards. With that, we're going to jump right into the conversation. I'd like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Azu Nwagbogu. I'm a curator and I am the curator of the Liberated Voices Exhibition show at the Voices sector of the exhibition at Paris Photo 2024. I'm going to start by reading a quote. For the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. It may temporarily allow us to beat him at his own game, but it will never enable us to bring about genuine change. This is a quote by Audre Lorde. And this quote has been much rehashed and presented and discussed in the world of photography, because photography has been a tool that has perpetuated certain ideas about others and perpetuated the concept of hierarchy within the post-colonial narrative. And as we work with photography and we use photography as a tool to remediate or to change these histories, we also admit and understand the limits of the tool of photography. And the 3 artists that we've invited to be part of Liberated Bodies, I believe by taking a closer look at their work, you can observe the frustration that they have with the limits of photography. They seem to not disrespect, but they do not treat it as sacred. They do not treat it as something that is untouchable. I think rather they treat it as the archive in particular, something radioactive, something that you change, but also changes you. So I'd like to start with what do you love about the medium of photography and what frustrates you about the medium of photography? Let's start with that question with that.
我想一想 ，sorry， 有点紧张。我觉得任何媒介都是有限制的，只有限制才会有自由。
He likes the medium of photography and also actually the limitation of photography, because when there's a limitation, there's actually freedom to explore within the medium.
我到现在仍然认为摄影的最大的魅力在胶片摄影的曝光和显影之中。
He thinks the most charming part of photography is still very much in the process of film and enlargement in the darkroom, working with the hands as a physical material.
当摄影师们按下快门的那一刻，它是神秘的一刻。
The moment that you press the shutter on the camera is this very holy and mysterious moment.
它连接着过去和未来。
It connects the future and the past.
那一刻是被赐予的。
This moment is given by God.
它里面有生命的力量。
It has the power of life in it within this moment.
当然，在另外一个方面，摄影它是政治的。
But at the same time, photography as well is political.
它会跟人之间的关系是一种被动的接受的关系。
We as a viewer is a passive, it's a passive viewer in front of the media.
一些人或者是一些 社会机构它会利用这摄影的政治性来去生产意识形态化的照片。
So photography is used as a tool to portray a certain ideology or certain idea and the political structure behind it.
美国有一位非常重要的评论家叫苏珊·桑塔格，他说，他曾经写过一本书叫《弄摄影》，他说，摄影是对死亡的一种提示。
So the famous American writer Susan Sontag once said that photography is actually an indication of death.
但是我现在不这么认为了。我觉得摄影既是对死亡的提示，也有对爱和生命的提示。
But now I believe it is a moment of death, but at the same time, it's a moment of beauty and life as well. The power of life behind the camera.
对，就看我们怎么使用它。
It all depends on how we use it as a medium.
Thank you so much for that, Kai. Joana, what frustrates you about photography, and what do you love about the medium?
Je vais répondre en français.
I will answer in French. What I like most in photography is the fact that it is not a medium. It is not something that I use to work. Photography is part of my life. And photography helped me live and helps me discover who are the others and who I am. It's a bond to the others, a link to the others, and learn what is around me. So I do not contemplate my life without photography because it's a discovery space, an unlimited space in my spiritual, personal, and professional life, and even religious life. Photography is a medium which is known to convey images and archive them, but there is also another dimension, that of superposing something between reality and the image that I create. Photography, to me, is not just a work; it's a way of life.
The same.
So I came to the world of photography, I think, purely by chance. I always say that I feel like it chose me, that I didn't choose to become a photographer. I regard myself very much as a storyteller. I've used photography or the camera as a tool to tell stories. But my interest has always been very much in oral histories and in theater. And so, photography, or my introduction to photography, I use it as a space to bring in all of my different interests. And so I've not seen it as a limiting medium because I've not approached it, I think, with the same sort of love of photography that people, especially I think coming from a South African context, and going to the Market Photo Workshop, which was a space that was started by the late photographer David Goldblatt, as a space that was giving people of color the opportunities and like a sort of skill transfer to be able to document their own communities and the sort of atrocities that were happening during apartheid. I came in a very different moment when it was post-apartheid, and I had an interest in identity and the sort of questions around identity. And because my interest was in theater and in literature, I sort of used the medium to bring in all of my different interests.
So talking about the archive now, the work that you do, each of you, you engage with the archive as a tool. And I'm interested in the way we can expand this concept of counterculture, if you like, resisting the archive as something tyrannical that dominates the sensibility, but you still have the space to engage with it, right? So I begin to think as a curator to introduce indigenous concepts, to think about the archive as a gift. And if you think about it as a gift, what does the concept of a gift mean in sort of a lot of indigenous cultures in South Africa, in Shona, in Zulu, in Abidjan, in Beijing. The concept of a gift, when you find a gift or you've been offered a gift or you've discovered a gift, how do you engage with that archive? Or how do you engage with this gift of the archive as something that you do not put on the table, but you can actually do what you want with it? So does that resonate with you as a way to think about the historiography that you have to sometimes repudiate or change or engage with or integrate in your work?
So one of my earlier series, Kilefalaga, which means it's my inheritance, particularly speaks to this idea of a gift and inheriting something. So it's a series that is that I made 2 years after my mom had passed on, in realizing that a lot of the clothes that she was wearing when she was in her 20s were still in her wardrobe, and being able to identify a lot of the sites where she'd been photographed. And so very much also, so then tracing the places and photographing myself and reenacting these photographs of hers. And so also the title of the work, Kilefalaga, speaks very much to me thinking about photography as a gift, photography or these photos as a sort of, as something to inherit, but the clothes as something to inherit. So thinking about archives beyond just, photographs, but also thinking about her clothes also as a sort of archive. And so I think I've really thought, and also going to what Chai was saying about the sort of the gift and the sort of spiritual element and the photography's sort of resonance with death. So that work very much ties to that. So I was able to think about or use photography to be able to investigate a loss, but to also be able to celebrate life. And so it ties very much to what you are speaking about as you're struggling to find the images.
There we go.
So
no, in particular, you talked about the passing of your mom. I believe that series went, I don't know if that's the right term, went viral, but maybe it wasn't viral, that's not the term at the time, but it really was like a hot knife cutting through butter in the world of photography at the time, because it really dealt with memory, with loss, with the fragility of memory as well, because there was something quite present but also absent in those superimposed images of your mom. We all it's a pity that we don't have those images here, but can you speak a little bit to that and explain what that meant to you at that particular time and how you've evolved from that?
So that's a work that at this point is about 12 years. And so this really was the work that for me is the closest to the medium of, okay, there it is. So that work is the closest that I've come to really working with photography. So I had found, as I said, these photographs of my mom when she was around the same age that I was when I started this series. So in her early 20s, and just also realizing how photography was also a space for performance as well, how she was also performing the sort of ideal self, because this was not necessarily how she looked on a day-to-day. She was a factory worker, and so she wore her factory worker's uniform or overalls every day, but the photos that now come to represent her, there isn't a single photograph of her dressed that way. So photography presented a space for me of the performative and the sort of theatricality. So it was more about, I think, not just loss. I mean, so there were many layers, I think, to this process. But I've obviously, over the years, moved beyond working that closely to the medium of photography and have started to really chop up the image.
Thank you. Well, Joana, yours is a little bit different because you meditatively revisit the sites that interest you, and you shoot consistently at dawn, same time of the day, the same light. And then your archive over the years is what has produced the template, the foundation for the new work that you've been working on, and Savale, Albion. Can you speak a little bit of the concept of a gift in terms of you giving yourself a gift and also working with historical archives in your practice?
D'abord, je voulais
revenir. First of all, I would like to come back on what Lebohang just said. I remember your work on your mother after your mother passed. It inspired me a lot when mine died. We inherit the experiences of our parents. And the fact that we were able to recreate the images of your mother's youth illustrates the idea of the gift of what an archive can be, because you were able to grieve from there.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
Actually, you have no. Okay, I will tell it in English. But what was really amazing about this work, I wanted to start with it. This is what I remember when this work came out, and now it resonates more in my own experience as my mother passed away 3 years ago, and seeing your work for me it's even deeper, even more important to see how you inherited your mother's experience, and the way how photography and your archive helped you go through what you were dealing with through photography. In my case with Albayan, for example, it was before my father was really ill, and I wanted to relieve myself, and I started working. Oh, j'ai commencé en anglais là maintenant. Okay, I started working early in the morning, every day, just to relieve myself. But also, I wanted to archive and to treasure, to take pictures and keep them for myself. So that, because each time I was walking around, I was thinking about what used to my memories, and also what I was dealing with in the moment was overlapping the experience of working early in the morning and photographing. Then every layers came on, and I realized that what I was photographing was telling many things about myself, and I was also pouring something into the work while I was walking, but also while I was working on the piece. Now the gift is for myself as I'm working. The creative process itself is a huge gift, and I realized it while I was working. Years after years, I realized how important and how rich this process was, and I've came to the conclusion that the process itself is more important than the piece itself.
I agree.
And then when the piece goes to someone else, the piece is already going to live its own life.
The gift.
The gift. So there are many stages of gift. The first gift is just to contemplate, then to shoot the picture, then to work on it, then to let it go. You see?
Kai, you found over 10,000 passport photographs, and you've been collecting this gift of the archive for many, many years. And you presented this beautiful installation as part of the exhibition with the 3 doors, 100 years. Can you speak a little bit about this concept of gifting in your work? Thank you so much, Anita. I forgot to share the work. I'm sorry. There we go.
Uh, 每个人可能都有一大堆的记忆和经验，都在处理这些经验和记忆。
So everybody has a lot of memories and experiences from their own life, and we are always constantly processing these emotions and these experiences.
照片里面也包含了这些经验和记忆。我收藏了大概有60万张照片，关于中国的照片。这里面有我的父辈的经验和记忆，也有我的经验和记忆。
So the photographs are commodities of these experiences and memories. And for me, the photographs I've collected throughout the years, I have about 600,000 images in my archive. And these are images of my parents' generation, but also my own generation.
如何处理掉这些经验和记忆，是我工作的一个核心。
The core of my work is how to process this experience and emotions through photography.
我的一个工作方法就是等待和发现。
My method of working is to wait and to discover.
我针对每一张照片的方法是在我这个漫长的等待的过程中，这个照片还有以及我的过去的经验和记忆启发给我的。
So in the process of waiting, I let the photograph inspire me.
那个新的结构是在原始的照片里边生长出来的。
My interpretation and the new interpretation of these photographs grow inside of these old photographs.
不是我强加给他的。
And it's not that I impose it on them; they come to me.
所以这些种体是在中国那个土壤里面自然生长出来的，包括我的创作方法。
So including my creative process, it grows as well as the interpretation of the Chinese history and background. It grows and comes out of the photographs.
这些经验和记忆里面有我们的非常沉重的历史的包袱。
So it carries a pretty heavy weight from my growth from the past history of China.
我想通过一个比较轻松的、幽默的方式来化解这个沉重的包袱。
Yeah, I personally would like to process this weight and burden using a very playful and humorous method interpreting these photographs.
这个过程既是清理我的经验和记忆，也是我在重新塑造我跟这些照片之间的一种新的关系。
So this process is as a way to process these emotions, but also to establish a new connection with these images.
我想再回应一下阿祖最初提到的那个主人的房子，不能用自己的工具去拆除主人的房子那个话。如果我遇到那个哲学家的话，我会问他，他说的主人是谁？
He would like to pose a question of your quote at the beginning of the master's tool, cannot dismantle master's house. In this context, who is the master?
That's a great question. So let's imagine the photography is the master and the archive is the master, and the limits of photography is what we're interrogating within those ideas. You know, when we all grew up with images that misrepresented or presented a certain hierarchy, if you like, of cultures, of ideas. I mean, in particular, one of the things I like about one of the reasons that we have the three of you in this particular exhibition is that your work is not didactic or preacherly or exhortatory or, you know, telling you finger wagging. It's more or less just presenting a very personal interpretation of history, your personal history. And Kai's work, you know, you deal with, in this exhibition, 100 years of the history of modern China. And from 1949 to 1976, we had Mao's era, we had the Great Leap Forward, we had the Cultural Revolution, we had the May 4th movement, we had some of the most significant moments in modern humanity's history. But none of the work on view feel very heavy in that sort of preachily or didactic way. Same thing with Lebo. You know, your work does not shy away from the issues of land or ecology or restitution, but you find a way to be playful, to be humorous, to be seductive in it. Same thing with yourself, Joana, with a lot of the topics that you deal with. In particular, in this exhibition, you deal with ecology, you deal with a modern concept of African femininity in your work, or feminism rather, in your work. So these are, I think, at this particular time, we are interested globally in non-didactic work that allow and trust the viewer to feel something, to engage with the work, not to tell people how to think or feel or engage, but actually to create that space so that your viewer and the audience can really find the resonance within their work. If that is accurate, please, we can say something. Otherwise, feel free to correct me.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Azu. I believe that the best way to engage with other people is not to tell them what they should think, but more open the conversation, and to give your point of view is not to impose it, and let the viewer think about what resonates in him or her is the best way to communicate clearly about something that is finally very universal and very human. The fact that I work from Côte d'Ivoire and from Ivory Coast and from Africa doesn't mean that I only have to translate and give an image that was expected from me. I only want to talk about what's my reality, but also that could be a reality of guys or from Lebohang. And I'm quite proud and happy to be sharing this space with them in Paris Photo, at the center of France and the world, the Western world, because we have something to say, but in a very playful and very authentic way of what it is to be us and what we should share with other people without having to go through the Western gaze. That's just our reality as it is, not something that we want to teach, but only something that we want to share because it's as valuable as any other artist.
Lebo, perhaps?
I mean, I think the idea of the archive is just going back to the statement of the archive. The idea of the archive is not something that is static. I've always struggled with the idea of like history being something that is that's done, like that has a full stop. And I think also to then think about who has written history and like the idea of like grand histories. And so that's why for me, the archive is very much connected to personal stories and to oral histories, and really becomes a space in which to interrogate the sort of master history and what and who has decided that this is the master history, and particularly coming from a context like South Africa or the African continent, with the sort of histories that we come with and that we hold. I think for me, it's always important to go back to whether it's my older family members, whether it's the elders, to really interrogate what is sort of said about South Africa, in order for us to be able to reimagine, I think, a future for these places that carry so much beyond the sort of imagery that is out there in the public. I think that's also why I work with the personal stories, and particularly with the family photo album, because I think there's something within the family photo album and within personal stories that helps us look at the past differently, that helps us think about the future differently. And particularly to think about the fact that a lot of the images that were circulating from very particular contexts, as Joana is saying, that Black people also document in a particular way. And so there's also images that have circulated in the West context that aren't necessarily how people would have documented themselves. And so the family photo album for me becomes interesting, I think, because of that.
So let's talk about the dioramas, the theatricality of it, right? And the fact that we all grew up with a certain idea of what a diorama is. It's also very subversive for you to use that same visual language that is quite colonial and to reverse that gaze, to be subversive in the way you approach your dioramas. Can you maybe speak to the process, but also speak to some of your intentions in the way you juxtapose the landscape, the land, which is still a very contentious issue in Southern Africa, and your personal, this image, I think, really is a great example of that juxtaposition.
Before I started working in the sort of diorama format that you see at the Voices booth and at the La Patinoire booth, I had started working at this scale. So this was 20, so this work is at the same time that I was making Gilefalaka, Her Story with my mother. I was also producing this work, Her Story, which was a story about my grandfather, because I was interested in the family name Kganye, which means light, as I perhaps have mentioned. And I, at the time, was working on television productions, and so became very much fascinated with set design. And that's when I started to think about the sort of theatricality that both photography and the theater space use. So how both rely on light and how both rely on performance and staging. And so I then started to play with this sort of language from production and from theaters and incorporated that into my work. And so only much later was I then starting to work with, as you see in this film briefly, the idea of like pop-up books and thinking about how family photo albums are very similar to pop-up books and how they become a space of fiction. And, later then really thinking about the sort of politics of the diorama format and how diorama sort of exist within the West, particularly in ethnographic museums. And so this really becomes me, subverting what the diorama has been used for.
So do you want to maybe also speak a little bit about some of your processes, the research that informs your work?
So particularly with the personal stories, I have been traveling around South Africa trying to locate family members around South Africa and really questioning, the family name and really thinking about the erasures of family identities, thinking about the erasure of languages, the erasure of family names, and how, a lot of Black people were documented incorrectly or their names are completely changed. And so linking all of that, those stories of like migration and looking at it through my own personal story in terms of my family and the fact that our family name is spelled in these 4 different ways. And so at the center of this work is very much about the sort of erasures of families, family identities. Even though my family sort of moved by choice to find better opportunities and go to the city. So my grandfather becomes central because he refused to work as a farm laborer during apartheid. And at a time when Black people could not be in the cities or weren't allowed to be in the cities, or there was a lot of restriction in terms of movement. And so really thinking about both forced migration, forced removals and forced migration, but also the choice to look for better opportunities and how that also does change the family dynamic, but also the family identity.
Thank you. Kai, your work, 100 years, you clearly, you work with the simplest form of photography, the pamphlet photograph. But on the back of the person photograph, there's a lot of information that really shapes and allows you to build this beautiful archive, this beautiful history. We're going to try and get to your work in a sec. So making that link with Lebo's idea of searching for the lost histories, are you interested in the personal or your research working with these archives? Is it more on the meta history of China, or are you interested in getting closer to some of the subjects from the archives that you found?
它既是我个人的，也是关于我在那片土地上生长的一些记忆的生命的一些记忆吧。
The archive that means something very deeply personal to him, but as well as he wants to interpret a certain era and a certain history behind these images.
大家都知道，过去的100年，中国发生的特别大的各种各样的变化。
Yeah, so in the last century of China, a lot of changes has happened. So this 100 years installation composes of identity photos of anonymous people that the artists have collected throughout different flea markets in China. And the installation composes of 3 doors, and it really illustrates by the look of the people, how they dress, how they look at the camera, as well as the photographic paper to see the change of history of China through the portraiture of people.
You feel free, you can clap.
过去就是从清朝结束，1910年结束之后，中国经历了军阀的轰战，然后第2次世界大战，然后内战，后来的文化革命，以及后来的改革开放。这100年，这是人类历史上非常罕见的一个事情。为什么有这样的事情呢？是因为在100年以前，中国经历过将近2000年的这种皇帝的时代。
So the recent, again, coming back to the history, the recent 100 years of China has seen the destruction of the imperial China and the civil war, the communist, the cultural revolution, the great leap forward, as well as the opening up, the recent opening up in the 80s and 90s. So this is a very rare historical phenomenon in the human history.
就在100年前的时候，那个皇帝的时代突然结束了，中国要进入现代国家，那这不是一件非常容易的事情。
So all of in 1910, Imperial China suddenly stopped because of foreign invasion, because of civil war situation, and while we need to quickly change it to modern China, this is not a very easy process.
因为历史它是有依赖性的。我们的人是靠习惯活着的，社会也是靠一种历史依赖去往前发展。
Yeah, so this is not an easy process, and because we are habitual beings, so we have a lifestyle and we have an ideology that we are used to. So this change that happened within the 20, 30 years of time between the 1910s to 1940s, it's a very difficult, complex, but also interesting a period of time.
我可以举一个简单的旧约里面的一个故事，摩西带领犹太人的祖先从埃及出来，去往新的地方的时候，那段路只有1个月就可以走到，但是他们却在荒野里面走了40年时间。
To me, it's I go back to a story in the Bible where the Moses had to lead the Israelites coming out of Egypt to go through the Red Sea. Actually, the road is maybe only 1 month long, but it took them 40 years to actually come out of the old and to the new. So this, I think, resembles to the artist the process that has, in a way, should be longer than what it is. Like we experience a lot of dramatic changes within a very compact period of time.
If you look at the portraits, the ID photographs, they seem to give an overview in segments of the history of China over the last 100 years, from the warlord era, the Civil War era, 1910 to 1949, and from 49 to 76. And then, so what is Kai's view when he assesses these photographs, these images? What's his sort of summary on his own assessment on that history based on the photographs that he's found?
曾经有一位批评家他说过，他说人的面孔是意义竞争的场所。
Somebody said once that the faces of the people are the competition of meanings.
The physiognomy.
的意义竞争的场所。
对，
it's the faces of 继续再阐述。
就是它是就是一种大家看脸会看到这个人的背景。
So you see the people's spirit and background through the eyes, through the portrait. And I think for him, the identity photo is very much because he actually was a portrait photography in the army. And I think portraiture as a medium to him is a very strong tool to look into the people, to look into people's soul through its eyes with the medium of photography.
如果一个孩子他出生在一个非常宽松的有爱的这样的一个家庭，那他肯定是一张活泼可爱的脸。没事，你就这样先说。
So if a child is born in a loving family, they will show a very smiling and light face.
如果这个孩子出生在一个压抑的捆绑他的一个家庭，他肯定是一张委屈的脸。
And they will show maybe a sad face if they are born in a more repressed family and time.
同样，他如果是在一个非常丰富的、多元的、开放的社会，人会出现各种丰富精彩的一些人。
The facial expressions on the people would be more diverse if it's in a more interesting and complex time and era.
如果是一个封闭的社会、单一的意识形态的社会，那么人慢慢的就会趋向于一致。
When the region and the ideology is more suppressed and more imposed, people will show a less expressive. People will have less expressions that become
monotonous.
Yeah.
So let me, Joana, you have speaking about this idea of expression and weaving history onto the narrative and sort of remediating the context of that particular landscape. The works that we have in the booth for voices really create a new juxtaposition between cityscapes and women. Can you speak a little bit to that? And we will maybe open up for questions because I know there are a lot of people that are eager to ask questions. So if you have questions, Joanna is going to just speak a little bit about the work before we dive into questions. Can you speak a little bit about the new methodology of working with this new body of work that is on view, where you juxtapose more cityscapes with your subjects and your collages?
The cityscapes are, most of the cityscapes are the cityscapes of Abidjan, or all the countries that I can visit and during early morning walks. But this is, for example, Dakar. At the beginning, I was more drawn to beautiful landscapes that were soothing and very photogenic. And but for example, here, this last picture is Kyoto. It's a bridge in Kyoto where I was doing a residency. And I started photographing everything that was where I was going, not only the places that were idyllic and more photogenic and more appealing for the viewer. So for me, beauty is everywhere. And this is Dakar during the COVID time. People were with the masks. And this has become already an archive. 2 years or 3 years ago, it's already obsolete. But walking the streets early in the morning in Dakar and shooting this picture was like, for me, yes, of that time, that is a very close past, but that is already past. And I stopped wanting to get the best images of the landscape, but showing exactly what I was going to see and experience. This is again Dakar, early in the morning, and Accra. And so for me, it's about making a testimony of what I am experiencing and the dialogue between the landscape, the outer landscape and my inner landscape, without wanting to make it perfect. The perfection is in the imperfection. And what I'm willing to live through this experience to the viewer is exactly what I feel and how it felt to be in this exact environment. Then I leave it to the viewer to explain and to feel and to interpret it the way they want, because it's not closed. Sometimes I start a piece and the piece will tell me what I have to understand from this experience of walking early in the morning. And the process is not closed. The process is almost interactive between what I'm creating and what the viewer will understand. And there's no wrong answer. For me, it's completely interactive.
We will not be terrorized by the fascism of perfection. We embrace all of the forms of imperfection to allow us to think through, regardless of who's in power. But if you have questions, please just raise your hand and we will take those questions real quick. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. All of your guys' projects are extremely personal about your own family. I'm wondering what questions you ask yourself or methods you have when approaching someone else's family and reimagining their history. What's that process like for you? How do you do it in a sensitive way?
I would like to thank you for your question, but I also want to tell you that what's happening in my family may not happen in yours, but can still give you an insight of your own experience as a human. Most of us human have quite similar experiences and sometimes very different. But it's just sending this to the world, and so that the other person that is going to see the work will interpret it the way they want. But at some point, we are always kind of linked to each other. We will always have similarities. And when I work, I focus on the fact that we have more similarities than differences. So what I am experiencing today, for example, when I see the work of Lebohang with her mother, when I saw the work, I wasn't experiencing this. But now that I see her work after having experienced the same from Côte d'Ivoire to South Africa, for me, her work is more valuable to me now because I'm now experiencing what she used to experience 10, 12 years ago, and it's very precious for me. So that's how when you send something to the world, you just let it live, and that's it.
So for the last few years, I've been working particularly with the personal stories and personal narratives. And I mean, Kilefalaka, for example, really was not a work that I intended on creating. It's really a work that, that I always say sort of gave birth through me. That was not, yes, it was my experience, but I think what it's done in the world over the last few years, I never could have imagined because I didn't think that I was even making a body of work. And so I think it's really much later when this, when I'd realized that it had really become a body of work that, and then you, as you say, Joana, that you let it out into the world and it does its own thing. And that's what it's done over the last few years. And, continuing to work with the personal narrative. And I didn't know that what also that meant is that then for the next 12 years, I'd have to speak about loss. So you don't actually, I think, especially when you're starting out, you don't actually know that now you have, you sort of added to a discourse. And so now you become part of it. And so now you have to speak to these things that your work is speaking to. But with other works, not every work has been about my personal story. And, and I think also the beauty of us that are sitting here is that we don't feel, I personally don't feel the limits of photography. And that's why I'm able to work between photography and film and sort of performance and use theatricality. And it goes beyond my family story. I think sometimes there's a story that you need to birth, and other works are, my new work is about Cameroon. I've never lived in Cameroon, but it's, somehow my research took me there. And now I'm able to sort of, really have an interest in histories beyond South Africa. So sometimes work takes you elsewhere.
Something else that I really appreciate about the three artists of view is that their work is all really influenced by literature, whether it's fiction or historical or works, but usually fiction. And Lebo, Joana, Kai, all of you, each of you really work within that idea, and it's evident in the work. And for someone that, a lot of my work really starts off with a fictional narrative, I really think it's really quite a rich way to enlighten your work and to enliven it and to give it energy. Was there another question in the audience? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a question for Lebohang. I was just thinking about your project with your mother, where you're inserted yourself, and in looking at those pictures, there's kind of they're quite happy in a sense. Your mother seems to be. They're just pictures of her looking really happy, and then you're there as well. And going back, I guess, to the video that we saw a little bit off in terms of the pop-up video, I'm not sure of the content of that, but there's just something interesting, I guess, about the tone. And I was just curious about, I guess, your choice of medium and how that impacts, I guess, your thought process in terms of you thinking that you should get a certain tone out of the artwork, if that makes sense. I'm just thinking of the idea of, people associate the pop-up book with childhood, with happy memories. But then if other people approach it in a different context, they might not really have positive memories. So I was just curious about your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I mean, I think as Azu also mentioned, and as I'd mentioned earlier, I very much have an interest in literature, but also in thinking about photography alongside or thinking about photography initially from the lens of the family photo album. And because of that, I sort of arrived at thinking of sort of realizing that how fictional actually that space also is. So thinking about memory alongside the imaginary and the sort of fantastical. And so working with the pop-up book had very much to do with that. It had very much to do with with the photographs as a space of the imaginary. And so I've not, to a large degree, I've not considered photography, as I said, as something stagnant. It's really something that is in motion. And so working with the pop-up book and working in particularly creating that film, I'd started to work in film from 2014, and and I was quite interested in like shadow theater, and so I think to a large degree there's a space for play within the work. Yes, it's speaking to these deeply political issues and these these histories, but for me to add that element of play is crucial, because I don't see it as a space that's just, I think when we associate these deep histories, you always think about the pain of them, but there's also layers. People are living, people are happy during that very particular difficult period.
So thank you so much, Lebo. Thank you, Dai. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you all for coming. We have one last question. We're going to have to close.
Am I holding this right?
Can
you hear me?
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment to thank you, because I'm very impressed by your sincerity and your humility, all three of you, and how you manage to express.
There are 4 people here.
Be so articulate about. Excuse me, excuse me, all of you. Express. You be so articulate about something that's visual and that conveys so much emotion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For those of you who haven't been to the Voices sector, please do drop by. Lebohang, myself, Joana, and Kai will be there to give you a walk through the show and to answer any questions you might have. Thank you, Anna Planners. Thank you, Perry Photo. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Julian. Look at that. And thank you, Loft Gallery, where I don't see Yasin. Maria Pierre and the whole crew, the whole gang, everyone who's been part of this wonderful exhibition. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting this great initiative, Voices. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.